Alright, this is the third take. I've done my speech too quickly. This is the video for the first speaker of the government team with the motion that this house supports the trends of performative activism in Indonesia. So without any further ado, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels. What we must acknowledge is that technology and the digital world has given many benefits in many aspects of the world. In the current status quo, for example, where there comes a case of democracy violations or cases where the government aren't working effective and efficiently, for example, there are two upbringings in the mass of people. Firstly is the normal demonstration or traditional activism where the people go to the streets to do protest, for example, and secondly the performative activism where people protest with symbolic methods and minimal substance in order to raise awareness regarding the issues. Our job here as the government are simple. We here are justifying performative activism and proving how it is actually beneficial for the sake of the nations. Three jobs that I'm going to do in today's debate. Firstly is to set the definition of the debate. Secondly is to deliver our framework as a side of government. And thirdly is to deliver our opening argument and also the mechanism that's used to support today's motion. First point, definition. Panels, we must clarify what performative activism means. Well, in simple terms, it basically refers to an activism where the symbolic element is more emphasized, not worrying about the substance, or in short, it has minimal substance. Second point, framework. Let me elaborate our framework, or like the government side framework. Firstly, the stances. Our stances here is simple. We think that the presence of performative activism is necessary and how we should support it for the sake of the nation. And why do we think it is important? Well, let me characterize it. Panels. The majority of people in this nation are using social media and are living partially in the digital world. On the prior years before social media, for example, we can see that the spread of information regarding activism, like what's the problem to address, for example, it takes too long for the spread to happen since it's done in a conventional way. On our side of the house, we think that the role of performative activism will be important in educating our rights to have a good nation at the end of the day. So yes, we are supporting this motion to the fullest today. Third job, what are our mechanisms and our arguments to support our side? Well, firstly, mechanism. Our mechanism today is simple. Firstly, we will be advocating the freedom of free speech in the digital world. In meaning, we will pressure the government to give us the right to spread information, for example. We will pressure the government to give us right to not be silenced in the digital world, for example, and to spread information that are actually factual for the sake of the nation's well-being. Secondly, we will create a digital community of activists on the digital world. Why do we think this is important? Because in order to have a healthy, productive debate for the sake of the nation that's going to be advocated upon the whole digital world, or the digital world inside of that nation, for example, we think a community will be the most effective method since people can see the process of creating the substance to advocate for. Plus, it is a simpler method to make sure there are no polarization of information, since the information itself comes from that certain community. So there won't be any cases where there are misinformation is actually present. Why? Because the information will only be delivered by or like inside that certain community. Secondly, what are our arguments in today's debate? Well, firstly, we analyzed this motion and dissected it into two categories: the moral justification, also the practical benefits of it. So, to justify this motion morally, firstly, we think that as soon as the information spawns in the digital world, like social media, for example, we think that people will receive this information quickly. Why? Because as I said earlier, majority of the people are on social media. Since the majority of the people inside of a certain nation or inside of that nation is in the social media in the first place, we think that the information that spawns, or like the information that is being put inside that digital world will spread massively, will spread easily, and will be widely spread at the end of the day. Secondly, we argue that this method is the safest way for people to spread information, since the risk of being killed or trampled on the field, or like trampled on the streets, for example, are actually minimized. We do acknowledge the fact that at the end of the day, activism will have victims or will have fallen victims. But on the preparation phase, on raising awareness regarding the issue, for example, we think that our side is stronger at the end of the day. On the other hand, even if the amount of victims stays the same, like the amount of victim from when we actually do performative activism or not still stays the same, we think that the impact towards the nation's well-being will still be better on our side. Why? Because since we have done performative activism, the amount of people that actually knows about this certain movement or that knows about this certain act will be more like the number will be higher in our side, and that will impact in more people knowing about the issue. They will be more aware, therefore the mass will gain more power, and that happens only at our side of the house, and it is exclusive only in our side of the house. Next, practical values, which will be elaborated by my next speaker, since I think I'm out of time already. It includes, firstly, it is a more the performative activism itself will give a more effective results compared to like the traditional activism where the spread of information is done manually, is done traditionally. The spread of information that is done by symbolic, it will reach people easily. It will reach people more in a simpler way. Why? Because performative activism simply has the benefit of every single people actually knowing, or like it easily brings awareness towards like people who doesn't actually know about the issue whatsoever, for example. So by in this, we think that performative activism actually brings more benefits to the nation, or to that certain nation. Why? Since it actually helps with the nation. Secondly, is that it is safer towards the civilians. Thirdly, it also gives less problems on the street in the first place. And fourth, it gives higher awareness to the people. And lastly, it brings a bigger mass of people at the end of the day to actually protest towards the government, to actually deal with the case to begin with, and it will lead to a better nation. And with that, we proudly propose. Thank you. Alright, so this is the first take for the first speaker of opposition. Hold on, pardon me. Alright, so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels. When an act or a program of novelty is being given by the government, we must dissect it to test whether it benefits everyone, a small number of people, or only people with governmental position. Subsidizing education, we all do. About subsidizing education, everyone should agree on it about it actually being beneficial, but limiting it only to some discipline and aggressively subsidizing those certain discipline is injustice for the taxpayer. Very proud to oppose. 3 things I'm going to do today's debate. Firstly, I'm going to clarify some points delivered from the government side while still addressing their issues at hand. 2 points that we want to deal with here. First point, while we do acknowledge that giving aggressive subsidies to STEM will give the illusion of cheap education, we won't think that it's actually going to be cheap. How? 2 scenarios. Scenario A, on their side, with cheap education, we can predict that a whole new wave of students will want to apply to STEM disciplines in university. This sudden increase will increase the competition that is already harsh to begin with in the first place. Like, if we see in the status quo, for example, there are many tutoring classes, private tutoring that charges high prices for these tutoring. On their side of the house, with the increase, or like with the extreme competition present, the tutoring classes and its price will increase parallel with the demand. And bear in mind that the competition itself is not even fair. The competition where one hand will have an advantage because of their tutoring will create the urge of other people, of other students entering a private class, and it will consume personal funding. This case is an accumulative matter that will result in the same expense actually being spent between their proposal and the status quo in the first place, while not bringing any significant economic aid, but it will impact other sectors. More on that later. Scenario B. Panels, even in their best case scenario, where the competition won't increase, we still think that their side won't win. Why? Because Since even if that's the case and the one passing the competition gets cheaper education or even free education to begin with, it's still unjust and unfair to other disciplines. What we need to remember is that a nation won't improve just by focusing on STEM or like focusing on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, for example. It needs many aspects like politics, economy, communication to actually start becoming a developed country or nation. So even in their worst case scenario, we think that government fails to win their point. Even if the government side shows the data that contains proof on how STEM and their career path has a great salary and all of that to actually sustain their citizens. We think that competence in other fields and other disciplines will do so too. So the comparative from our side has been present, and that data is not only exclusive in their side of the house. Second point, we need to remember panels that subsidizing needs funding. Funding means money and it Funding means money, and it means that economy is part of this conversation or is part of today's debate. Now, panels, on their side, they might think that these subsidies will bring better quality of education, resulting in human resources actually increasing in quality. While we do acknowledge that it is a possibility, we must remember that point A. While yes, economy can improve through education, we still think that this is a long-term process. Panels, we must acknowledge that the people in developing countries are mostly having economical problems or economical struggles that needs to be addressed immediately, and not all people will take these chances in the education, since those subsidies won't always mean free education, despite it being aggressive or not. People will still need money to pursue this certain education, as I said earlier, and it won't be possible if economical struggle are still present. Point B, the funding won't be available in those developing countries. Why? Since what we should remember and take note of is that these developing countries already has a limited funding to begin with. It is already split towards like education, healthcare, public infrastructure, and also like improving local economy. Therefore, allocating more money or allocating aggressively to aggressively subsidize these disciplines, these STEM disciplines, it won't be possible in the first place. And point C, what we must also remember is that the risk of corruption is present, and it is really big on their side of the house. Bear in mind that developing countries are very notorious for their government officials actually being corrupt, and they cannot deny that, point. Secondly, let me set the framework of the opposition. Firstly, our stance here is simple. First, one, we think that aggressive subsidies are unjust. Two, we think that subsidies should be spread towards all discipline and not aggressively done. And thirdly, we think that other aspects of a nation should have the same right to receive fundings from the nation, or like the equal funding from the nation. Opposition here only has three claims to prove, and to do so, we analyze the motion and dissected it into two main variables. First, talking about the moral standpoint. Firstly, we here argue that subsidizing basic human needs like shelter, healthcare are way more important to deal with. Morally, all aspects of life decency should be dealt with evenly and with enough justice, since each of them is needed to begin with. Secondly, we argue that it's very unjustified to only aggressively subsidize STEM discipline. Why? Since we think that other disciplines like politics, social, economy are also important to subsidize, and they should be subsidized equally in the first place. Lastly, practical challenges. Practical challenges that are a burden for government to pursue. Firstly, the funding burdens will be too heavy on their side, as I stated earlier. Secondly, is that student will also receive increased amount of burden, as I said earlier, also as I have delivered earlier. And thirdly, it will become an illusion of cheap education at the end of the day. And finally, public response will be terrible because of the unjustness that is present in the side of government. And with that, the government falls, and we're very proud to oppose. Thank you.